It's by exploiting. Basically, you understand how EV is generated in theory, and now you're going to go from defensive poker, so you're trying to play as unexploitable as possible, GTO, so basically if someone else deviates, you win, okay? But now you're going to go to how I would call it offensive poker. Basically, you're going to open your game up for exploitation. You're going to exploit your opponents. If they don't re-exploit you, you will have the maximizing strategy, okay? So it's exploitative, but you're optimizing versus that exploit. Welcome fellow poker players to another video here on the Poker Ambition channel, in which today we are going to be discussing how to go from 2BB to 8BB. A little bit of a different touch this video, okay? We're not gonna say check raise more, c-bet more, etc, etc. No, we're gonna go look at being a poker professional as a whole. So not only the playing, but also everything that goes around being a professional poker player, okay? It kind of all has to work at least until a certain level in order for you guys to succeed in your poker career. Now, if you liked this video, make sure to remember to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. And without further ado, let's get into it. So I named it going from 2BB to 8BB. And this was actually based on a couple of questions that I got on Twitch, where I stream. If you guys have never followed a Twitch stream, please come along to TheWakko show. And basically they were asking, well, Mr. Wakko, what do you think your current win rate is? Okay, and this was me playing 4 hours a week, having some fun at 500 Zoom with the Twitch chat. And I said to them, well, I don't know, probably around 2BB. And then a session later, someone asked me, what win rate do you think is possible? And I answered 8BB. So that means that there's a gap between what I'm currently winning and what I think it's possible to win at these games. So then I started to think, hey, this is actually great content to explain to you guys how I would now close that gap. Okay. If you don't follow me, guys, twitch.tv/pokerambition, TheWakko show. Please come give a follow. I stream. Go over to the Twitch stream and to the schedule, and there you can see when I'll be live. But without further ado, let's get into point one, which is quite obvious. So how do we go from 0 to 1? Basically, how do we, become a non-losing player, non-break-even player? Well, these are like your fundamentals, right? So I call them like your CB game. This is kind of, for example, when I started streaming, I hadn't played in quite a while. So basically the game that showed up was gonna be my C game, like the absolute bottom where I could fall back on. In general, in order for you to start winning at poker, you're probably playing at the right stake for your skill and bankroll. It's quite obvious. You have some decent pre-flop ranges. You have a certain default understanding of how poker works, and then, how do you generate EV? You are probably able to translate how to generate EV into a strategy that you can execute. So this is like your interpretation of how poker works. And you probably have certain basics of mental game performance and management of your career. Now, you might be better in some areas and you slack in others, but basically this, if you would count up these, what it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you would count up these 5 points, it would have a certain minimum, which makes you a winning player. Very basic. Then to go from 1 to 2, eliminating distractions and stop multitasking. Now, obviously, if I'm streaming Twitch, I'm multitasking and I'm very distracted. So obviously that doesn't really contribute to a higher win rate. But I see a lot of players, they might use Skype, Discord, whatever while playing. They have their cell phone in sight. These are all attention killers, okay? Your brain cannot multitask, all right? You can maybe train it to shift between tasks faster, but it's either focusing on one task or the other. And the problem with this is as soon as you switch a task or as soon as you get distracted, as point 2 mentions, it takes your brain roughly 20 to 25 minutes in order to refocus, so to get back to the same level of focus. Now, if you know this, it's very important to protect your focus and protect your playing environment so you don't get disturbed, okay? Another very important thing is to get your mind in the right place, setting intention to focus and refocus. Setting the intention to focus is quite interesting, and actually I have a point, I think a couple of BBs later, where I talk a little bit about how the brain works. Involves how the brain works when it comes down to playing poker. But I think especially setting the intention to refocus. So when you notice that your mind is drifting off, some mindfulness here, making the commitment now that you will spot that and refocus. Okay, as soon as you feel a little bit rushed, or as soon as you feel a little bit impatient, that you start to observe those feelings and have a point to come back to. Okay, for example, I would say, okay, how can I increase my win rate at this table if I feel like I'm zoning out because the challenge might not be big enough, or in general, I'm just autopiloting and I don't really feel engaged. All right, so I have points that I have the intention that I will refocus on certain points in order to re-engage myself into the session. Another thing you can do is invest in long-term concentration enhancing habits. Meditation definitely has shown to increase your focus because basically you're training your muscle to get better at refocusing. Actually, Adam has a whole part on how to do this and how to get better at this in the mechanics of poker. So 2 to 3 BB, okay, we're starting to become an okay winner. How do we get further? Well, we have to increase our engagement and curiosity. And this is kind of the point that I touched on about the brain. The brain goes on autopilot if it identifies a repetitive task in order to save energy. Your brain is an energy consuming machine. It knows that, and you know, your body and your brain, they communicate quite well. In order to save energy, he sees, okay, you're playing poker every day, and if you don't set new goals and are not engaged, your brain will start to recognize poker as a repetitive task and will go on autopilot to save energy. Now, think about that one for a second. So the thing that's actually your work and that you're trying to excel on, your brain is associating as a repetitive task and therefore goes in autopilot. Big mistake. Okay, this is not what we want the brain to do, but you know, the brain thinks this is good for us. So how do we prevent that? That is by erasing our curiosity and increasing our engagement, like setting certain intentions, having certain focus points. That's why I think it's always important to work on certain strategy related topics. Not necessarily, let's say for example, you have been putting extra work into your big blind check raise ranges. Okay, so every time that spot comes up, you're like, oh yeah, this was that spot. Probably everyone has noticed it, right? After you've done strategy and you recognize that spot at the table, you feel more engaged. And in general, you're more engaged because you've told your brain, hey, we got some things that we have to look out for. So your brain is like, okay, so I have to pay attention. Okay, I will pay attention. And the result of that is that obviously that spot that you're studying is going better, but in general, you'll be more engaged because your brain is not on autopilot. Okay, this is like a little hack here. Flow triggers, this is in general kind of what brings you into the flow state. For the people that don't know, a flow state is basically that moment where you kind of forget about time and you're just so engaged and just the whole world around you seems to fade away, and before you know it, suddenly an hour has passed by and you played really good poker. Well guys, this is not a coincidence. You have certain flow triggers, and I think raising your curiosity and engagement while playing is definitely one of them. And in general, this is very important in like long-term motivation and long-term engagement, knowing where you're going and why. Okay, so having a deep driver in order to sort of always be motivated. If we go to point 3 and 4, I've added game selection and networking. And I would like to start off with the first point. That is, if you are number 6 in the world and you play a 6-handed game versus number 1 and 5, you will lose, guys. So if your definition of success as a poker player is make the most amount of money possible at the tables, game selection is very important. And I sometimes see players just battle it out. And you know, this all depends. If they're just very competitive and they don't really care about the money as much, and their definition of succeeding is trying to beat those guys, then by all means, this is very much in line with your goals. But for a lot of people who are maybe less competitive, or the money matters more to them, this is probably not a great strategy. Okay, you have certain poker players that might not be as good, theoretical. Okay, I mean, this guy's number 6 in the world. He did quite a good job. But let's say number 500 in the world. Well, if number 500 in the world plays against, you know, the number 1000 and down onwards, he's gonna make a lot of money. So if you can get yourself into games where you're always the best player at the table, preferably for as much money as you can afford to lose, that is probably a very good way to make a lot of money playing poker. And this is kind of often forgot, basically. And you have a lot of people that like, no, the 500 nil Zoom pool, for example, no, you know, comfortable, I just sit down the pool, or I just click play, I don't have to. Okay, make a conscious commitment, but I usually find just that as an excuse. It will definitely slow down your career, depending on your goals, of course. Knowing when not to play. Also, I put it here, management, basically I mean like energy management, time management. But take the 500 Zoom pool, for example. If I would want to go from 2 to 8BB, I would definitely be more selective in when I play the pool, because I think sometimes the pool offers me a 10BB win rate and sometimes I'm definitely break even depending on how the pool looks. And I do see players grinding that stake for a living, and then I think your game selection or your pool selection in that case is not really spot on. Also know when to play. It's also like, it's an ego thing, okay? You have to take poker serious. You do this as a career. It's not just something, you know, you're not just putting your dick on the table and seeing who has the biggest. You know, you have to kind of surpass that and surpass your ego. Another good thing about networking, and actually the next slide I will go a little bit further into networking, is that you will be the first to know about opportunities in games and being able to play in them, okay? If you have good networking skills, you might get invited into certain games, or you might get a tip because, you know, you have a broad range of networks, people like you, they will give you a tip about some site that, you know, is a little bit underground still, but they can get you in. So I think it's a very important and underrated skill. 4 and 5, I will get to the feedback loop. And the feedback loop is something that basically it stands for continuous improvement. And basically if you can optimize the feedback loop, you will become a better player and a more consistent player, and your improvement will be continuous. That's why it's called continuous improvement. Very important here that you have a growth mindset. So the way you look at obstacles and the way you look at mistakes, there are opportunities for growth. So you will actually look at them and see what you can learn from them in order to improve. So the power of continuous improvement that I've touched on, basically it's managing your poker career and becoming a more professional player in general, okay? So being less of the gamer, you know, oh, I feel like playing poker. Oh, I'm a bit tired now. I feel like I now go to bed. Everything is based on feeling and not based on structure. And in general, success is habitual. So actually, I have the feedback loop right here. This is kind of what I came up with a little while ago. I haven't really redone it. Probably if I would take a new look at it, I could probably improve some things. But basically, it starts with your preparation. Then you go into performance. Then you're going to evaluate the performance. So basically you have the outcome, and the outcome you're going to evaluate. Very important to not evaluate it on $1. Okay, this is a mindset flaw, but evaluate it on how well you did on certain focus points. Remember the refocus that we said? How well did we do on refocusing? Okay. Then you can monitor. Basically, this is more of a statistical thing. For example, how often you manage to get your mind back to the present moment, or the check raising example. Well, did we indeed increase our check raise percentage? Okay, this is a stat, for example, that we can monitor to see if we're actually executing what we're trying to do. Then you're going to analyze. So you kind of analyze, for example, your data or your performance. And with those data, you're going to go, or with certain hands, you're going to go and discuss with your network. That's why it's very important to have a team around you, which is, I'm going further in the next slide. You're going to discuss certain hands or certain data with your peer group. From that, you will get feedback. You will process that feedback into your strategy. Then you will train your strategy. There's various ways to do that. GTO trainer, for example, is a way to do that. And then basically, you're going to enter the loop again. You're going to prepare with the new knowledge. You learn from your knowledge. You're going to try to perform again. You're then going to evaluate how you did, etc., etc., etc. The loop never continues. As soon as you basically stop the loop and you think like, oh, I'm now good enough, that's the point where you go down. Okay, guys, there's no stagnation. There's only forward or backwards, and it's up to you if you go forwards or backwards, especially in poker, because the rest is always trying to improve. So basically, if you slack off, the rest will just surpass you. 5 and 6, evaluation and input. Well, basically, at the evaluation point, you can get very good at that. Okay, you have solvers nowadays to evaluate how you did in certain spots. You can track KPIs, which stands for key performance indicators, like for example, how did you do on the big blind check raise? A statistic that you could that you could monitor. Okay, you can set, for example, I often set a goal. If I see certain points of my game are off, I might set a statistical goal, and I might have a filter ready after every session. I will load in that filter. Okay, I'm in the big blind, I could check raise the flop. How did I do in this spot? Okay, setting the intention and evaluating it. As long as you're not tracking it, as long as you're not trying to evaluate it, you don't know if you're actually doing it correctly. It will all be based on feeling. The bigger the dream, the more important the team. Okay. And I cannot emphasize this enough. I think Elliot Rowe had a great quote that said high stakes players don't hang out with each other because they're high stakes players, but they're high stakes players because they hang out with each other. Think about that one for a second. So basically, you see this, or same, you're the average of the five people you hang out most with. It all comes down to the same thing, guys. Gathering yourself in the right team, for example, in the feedback loop to discuss and get better feedback is very important. For example, if you look at my team, they're strat buddies, students, some fellow coaches of Poker Ambition. I made a little list here. Explode, Campy 7, Tunis, Need2, my 3, Elusive Mark, Flusu, Poker Kluka, Bill Lewinsky, Tino Mulder. Believe me, guys, if I have a question, some of these guys will have probably the best answer in the world. So I'm very confident in my ability to be a poker coach and a poker player, not necessarily because how I play today, but I have a lot of confidence in the future as well because I'm not alone. Okay, all these guys are willing to help me whenever I ask. They're willing to give me input whenever I want to ask. Okay, this is very important to invest time in, guys, to get a network. 6 to 7, mental game, analyzing self-sabotaging behaviors. Basically, at some point in your career, you will encounter certain difficulties. Basically, you know you should do something, but you're not doing it. And sometimes it can be good to kind of put that under the loop and see what's going on here. And sometimes you will see that it's something self-sabotaging, meaning that you think you want something, but actually in your head, you have a certain belief that if you get there, it will come to the cost of something, and then you will show self-sabotaging behavior. Another very important point is a limiting belief. These kind of go hand in hand. For example, if you don't believe that you can learn from your mistakes, okay, then why would you even start looking at mistakes in the first place? All right. Same with if you have the belief that you have to be super intelligent in order to beat high stakes poker, and you don't think you're very intelligent, then basically you will never get to high stakes poker because this belief will always be in the way. Why would you put in extra effort if you believe that it's IQ that you need to play 2K or higher, for example, and your IQ doesn't match that of players who play 2K and higher? Why would you even put in the extra work? Consistency is everything, and basically mental game will make you perform more consistently because your confidence will be stabler, you will have less tilt, you will show up more consistently. And basically, if you have a very solid B game and that always shows up, your downswings will also get less, basically, because you're performing at a higher win rate more consistently. So basically also you will need your mental game less because you have less swings in your game, if that makes sense. Mental game mistakes in game, and I will basically just as tilt and mental game mistakes, anything that you would afterwards know the right answer to, but in game you did something else, is a form of tilt or a mental game mistake. For example, the majority of my mistakes that I make while playing, often after I made the play, I already knew, shit, this was not a good idea. Or afterwards, I know like, yeah, this was indeed a mistake. Then it's a mental game mistake, not a technical mistake. So I can go to a solver and it will tell me something. But yeah, it's something that I already knew. I have to then figure out, okay, what was I thinking about in game, in which order, in order of importance, and how is that different than how I now look at the situation? What was a point that I've overrated or underrated? What was a point that I forgot? Okay, then Going back to the feedback loop, I can set that as an intention, or I can even train that way of thinking by playing the hand and out loud saying how I want to be thinking about that hand, putting that also in my session intentions. This is how I want to think in this kind of situations, in this order of importance. You could even visualize that. I'm a big fan of visualization before your session, so you can actually visualize yourself being in that situation and thinking about the right things in the right order. Actually, Adam Carmichael has a big part on visualization in the mechanics of poker as well, which I'm very excited about. It's a very, very, very useful skill, guys. And the last point, because as you can see, we're reaching the ABB, is exploitation. So I'm assuming that by now you have a very solid game, you have a very solid feedback loop, you have a very solid team around you. Basically, you're unstoppable. So how do you get to that next level? Well, it's by exploiting. Basically, you understand how EV is generated in theory, and now you're gonna go from defensive poker, so you're trying to play as unexploitable as possible, GTO. So basically, if someone else deviates, you win, okay? But now you're gonna go to how I would call it offensive poker. Basically, you're gonna open your game up for exploitation. You're gonna exploit your opponents. If they don't re-exploit you, you will have the maximizing strategy, okay? So it's exploitative, but you're optimizing versus that exploit. And this is kind of, I think, where the next level comes in, because it's basically impossible for a human to play GTO. We only try to. And I think playing a good exploitive strategy is actually in our grasp. We can actually do that while playing good GTO. Exact GTO is impossible. So I think you have a better chance at succeeding if you obviously understand GTO, you understand how EV works, you understand how poker works basically. If you don't yet, I will explain you that in the mechanics of poker. And then from there, you're gonna go to maximize your EV. And basically, how do you do that is you understand where your EV is going to come from based on all factors. So GTO generates EV in a certain way. It turns its equity into EV. And he does that based on certain things that are going to happen now or later in the tree. In practice, other things happen and that have impact on your EV, okay? So when you understand how EV is generated, you then also understand how it's not generated based on certain practical situations. So you will learn how to adjust correctly. And that's kind of when the real high win rates start to get in. So now you know, guys, how to get from 2 to ABB. If you need any help with that, we have a program, The Mechanics of Poker, which basically gives you extra ways in order to increase your win rate. Everything we explained, what to do, when to do it, how to do it, all the other questions that might remain. Go over to pokerambition.com and check it out and see if it's something for you. If not, I'm pretty sure there were a couple points in this video that have helped you. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, guys, if you liked it, and I'll see you at the next video. Subscribe to our channel and good luck at the tables.